Okay, tonight we're reading Rowley Jeffersons' awesome, friendly, spooky stories, and the story is going to be A Mummy. A long time ago in ancient Egypt, there lived a pharaoh named Mech. And when Mech died, the royal priests and priestesses wrapped his body to prepare it for the afterlife. But a few thousand years later, some archaeologists from another country discovered Mech's pyramid and took his sarcophagus with them. When Mech woke up, he was disappointed to find out that he was in a museum and not in the afterlife like he'd expected. On top of that, they didn't even put his sarcophagus in a nice spot. It's next to the family restroom. So Mech was angry, and he used his mummy powers to make a big mess of things in the museum. But even after Mech destroyed the museum, he wasn't satisfied. So he went outside, and that's where he really did some damage. That night, Mech was all over the news for wrecking the city. Mummy's revenge. Mech was just getting started, though. He went from country to country, destroying everything in his path, and wherever he went, he made headlines. Mummy détruit la ville. I don't know what that says. But after a while, Mech ran out of things to destroy, and people started losing interest anyway. Ribbon cutting at new dog park. Eventually, Mech settled down a little and tried to get used to living in the modern world. And even though he would have rather been in the afterlife, he had to admit that television was a pretty good invention. One night, Mech was watching the news and there was a story about how some archaeologists made a new discovery in Egypt. They found the tomb of Kaba, a pharaoh who lived a few thousand years ago. New Egyptian tomb unearthed. Well, at first Mech started getting angry because this brought back memories of what happened to him. But after a few minutes of deep breathing, he was able to calm down. People were excited about this new discovery because Kaba's tomb was really glitzy and full of treasures. But everyone was nervous when they opened Kaba's sarcophagus because no one wanted a repeat of the Mech situation. Things were different this time round, though. First of all, Kaba was much better preserved than Mech, and Mech was kind of annoyed when the people on the news kept pointing that out. Mech? Kaba. Poor Mech. When Kaba stepped out of his tomb, he didn't just start randomly destroying things. In fact, he seemed curious about the modern world and everything in it. He's looking at the water fountain, at the soda machine, at the scooters. Kaba started appearing on morning talk shows, and before long he was everyone's favourite mummy. And Mech never would have admitted he was jealous, but he was. In fact, Kaba was so popular that people started making all sorts of mummy merchandise and used his image without asking permission. Mummy gifts. So Kaba hired a slick lawyer and before long all that stuff was shut down. But then Kaba's lawyer took it a step further. His lawyer trademarked the mummy, which made it so that Kaba was the only one who could use the name. And then she made a big announcement about it in front of the TV cameras. The mummy. Well, this really ticked off Mech, who didn't think it was right that Kaba could do that. Plus, Mech was annoyed that he didn't think of it first. After a while, Kaba had his own fashion line and kids' cereal and even a major motion picture in the works. And everywhere Mech went, there was Kaba's face. Mech thought it was time for him to cash in on the mummy craze too, so he started to call himself the original mummy, and he put a few ads out there. The original mummy, available for birthday parties, corporate events, bar mitzvahs. But a few weeks later, Mech got a letter from Kaba's lawyers threatening to sue him for everything he owned unless he took down the ads from legal counsel of the mummy. But this just made Mech mad. Maybe not as mad as when he used to go around destroying cities with his mummy powers, but still pretty mad. So Mech hired a lawyer of his own and sued Carver to try and stop him from calling himself the Mummy, since Mech was famous first. And it was a huge trial and everyone watched it on TV. Mummies square off in court. Well, Mech didn't have a lot of money, so his lawyer wasn't as slick as Carver's, and when the trial ended, the judge ruled that Carver was the winner. Mech had to agree that he'd never used the name the original Mummy or the classic Mummy or anything like that. In fact, all he was allowed to do was call himself a Mummy in lowercase letters. For a while, Mech tried to make some money by calling himself a Mummy, but you really can't make any money with a name like that. Take a picture with a mummy, $3. Mech started working at an amusement park for fright nights in October, but it wasn't that much fun because it was a lot harder to scare people these days. Groan. Mech still wasn't giving up though. He started calling himself the Dead Pharaoh to get around the court agreement, but it turns out there was already a professional wrestler with that name and Mech just ended up back in court. Oh, poor Mech. Things were great for Carver for a few years, but after a while the whole Mummy act got stale and people stopped going to his movies. Eventually he got into comedy, but he made a few stinkers and that was the end of his film career. Not your daddy's mummy. Then someone claimed they found a big toe in a box of mummy flakes and Carver got sued for $1 million. Big toe found in cereal. And even though it turned out the person who sued him made the whole thing up, nobody would buy any food products with the word mummy on them after that. Soon Carver's money started to dry up and he couldn't afford the fancy lifestyle he was used to. After a while, he had to sell his private jet and his 3 mansions at a discount. Things got even worse when his wife left him and took half his money. Carver finally hit rock bottom when he had to sell his own sarcophagus. But things started to turn around for Carver when he ran into his old archenemy Mech, who was working as a food bagger at the grocery store. The two mummies got to talking and it turned out they had a lot more in common than they thought. Carver and Mech became friends and after a while Carver moved into Mech's apartment. And even though they didn't always get along as roommates, the one thing they agreed on was that television really was a pretty good invention. The end.